Hey everyone, today's video recap will be one of the most viewed and trending Argentine American historical drama crime film of 2022. It is Argentine, 1985. The film was produced and directed by Santiago Mitre and written by Mitre and Mariano Llanos. It stars Ricardo Darín, Peter Lanzani, Alejandra Flechner, and Norman Brisky. The film is about the violations of an extremist military tyranny that utilized mass torment, assault, hijacking, and murder as weapons of social control. Santiago Mitre's Argentina, 1985 sure goes down smooth. This was a brief introduction to film, and now let's begin to dive into the plot and enjoy watching. Likes and subscriptions are highly appreciated. The story starts 7 months after Argentina had at last won independence from the tactical autocracy, and the recently chosen president, Raúl Alfonsín, had accepted power in 1983. Subsequent to taking on his job, the president had proclaimed that the previous leaders who had perpetrated a few frightful wrongdoings and infringement as a component of the fascism were to be placed being investigated. The leaders, who still boldly had faith in their honesty, took this somewhat as an issue of pride for having neutralized the left-wing progressives who represented a gamble to power, and requested their preliminary to be led by the tactical court. In any case, no move had been made in these 7 months, and there was talk developing that the preliminary would really be led by the government court of requests, which is under common equity. It is during this time that the sole examiner for this situation, Julio Strassera, becomes careful about the chance of this really occurring. Julio knew well that assuming the case was for sure taken over by common equity, he would go under monstrous strain to hold matters within proper limits, while he, at the end of the day, had a firmly established energy for dealing with the horrendous conflict lawbreakers. An administration official working in close contact with President Alfonsín continues to visit Julio's office like clockwork, and albeit the examiner makes an honest effort to keep away from the man on different events, he understands the truth of the looming legal dispute too. It isn't so much that Julio is terrified to take on such a gigantic obligation, however it is fairly his trepidation that he probably won't have the option to give equity despite the fact that he needs to. That is the very thing that keeps the man down. Like each type of administrative power, the recently framed government additionally recruited and designated numerous from the autocracy system to keep working, and this made Julio even more wary about the power's genuine aim and want. Julio tracks down help and consolation in his better half, Sylvia, and furthermore in his young child and little girl. At last, the choice is at this point not in his grasp. In September of 1984, the military chamber sent in the report of their examination to the Court of Requests, in which it obviously expressed that every one of the commandants being attempted were right in their moves, and their choices made during the time were unobjectionable. This made it extremely clear that the tactical court could never rebuff the high-positioning men who were from their own field, and subsequently, considerate equity was expected to take on the preliminary. Julio Strassera currently had no real option except to lead the preliminaries against culprits of the grimy conflict and to act as the lead examiner in the preliminary that turned into the main court preliminary in the nation's set of experiences. The initial step for Julio Strassera to deal with the case was to get hold of a group of legal counselors who might assist him with setting up the indictment. Taking counsel from his lawyer companion, Dr. Alberto Muchnick, the man chose to not acknowledge any assistance from the public authority since the genuine expectations of these administration delegated attorneys wouldn't be known to him. All things being equal, he set about setting up his own group, yet this immediately turned substantially more troublesome than he had suspected, since the majority of the expert legal advisors he knew had either denied being involved or were allies of the extremist traditional dictators who were the essential charged for the situation. During the primer hearings in October of 1984, Julio was still without a group, and it was here in court that he initially met with the representative examiner, Luis Moreno Ocampo. In spite of the fact that Julio was at first suspicious about his representative, also, Luis' family foundation and his expressions of conviction turned his viewpoints around, and the two steadily turned out to be dear companions. It was Luis who recommended that they name a gathering of youthful, unpracticed legal counselors crisp out of graduate school and working in the head legal officer's office, for they would be the most committed to working, with their viewpoints likewise for the indictment. After a screening method, gave specific humor that exists all through Argentina, 1985, this group of young fellows and ladies was united. Strassera and his legal counselors needed to battle against time too, for they had pretty much over 2 months to track down all possible types of proof of crime, unlawful politically persuaded bogus detainment, and torment against 9 leaders of the Argentinian armed force. The recently named attorneys were sent the whole way across the country to search for leads and find data that would demonstrate that the monstrosity committed during the messy conflict were pre-arranged and coordinated means to control resistance. A significant number of them needed to confront provocation by police powers and normal dangers from individuals and allies of the military. In any case, by the date of accommodation of proof in February of 1985, they had the option to introduce an enormous measure of around 16 volumes of records as proof. While the arraignment continued to go about its responsibilities, every one of the attorneys and their families generally continued to get passing dangers and alerts over the course of the time, and on account of Julio Strassera, these dangers had begun from a whole lot sooner. Dreading for the well-being of his better half and kids, the man had hesitantly consented to the confidential security that the public authority had sorted out for him. On account of Delegate Examiner Luis Ocampo, the dangers and reprobations were of an alternate kind because of the family he had a place with. What the tactical junta and afterward the resulting preliminaries had extremely clear was the effect in political philosophy as for class, and Argentina, 1985 presents it skillfully. Luis Ocampo hailed from a rich family from the Argentinian high society, and like all people of such class everywhere, his relatives additionally had blind help for the extremist tyranny and armed force leaders. Thusly, when he took on this case as a feature of the indictment, his uncle, who turned out to be a colonel in the military, and his mom, who used to visit a similar church as Jorge Videla, who was one of the essential charged, Luis resembled the black sheep of his loved ones. Alongside these interior tensions, the man likewise had private covert operatives following him and by implication compromising him too. The legal dispute, overall, was likewise dreaded to be interfered with or dropped by dangers, as the individuals got a call cautioning them of a bomb shoot inside the town hall in April of 1985 when the formal proceedings were going to start. There was a push from the allies of the respondents to delay the preliminaries and maybe even root for another tactical upset endlessly. Nonetheless, the Council of 6 adjudicators who were managing the preliminary chose to genuinely begin procedures and not take such dangers continuously, as an ever-increasing number of casualties and witnesses showed up in court to give declaration. The specific degree of the regrettable demonstrations of the authorities was exposed. During the 7 years of the filthy conflict, which was the last military junta in Argentina, endless men, ladies, and even youngsters were savagely pestered, tormented, and killed. The main explanation accommodated these passings was that these individuals were important for left-wing progressive powers who were named enemies of nationals and foes of the country. In any case, there were numerous conventional residents who were impacted by the conflict between these different sides, and the military began killing for the most part every individual they needed to, and there was no outcome to it at all. No court preliminaries or hearings were directed for any of these casualties, and the leaders just continued providing ruthless orders to target any individual who defied their extremist rule. In view of the records of the people in question, a considerable lot of which are strongly introduced in Argentina, 1985, it was perceived that the military had been consistently tormenting and embarrassing individuals only for it and that they frequently had no data to look for except for just made torment their prisoners as a type of wiped out and savage diversion. A considerable lot of these prisoners had even been absent since the time they had been gotten by the military and had most certainly been killed. Such was the stunning degree of these torments, and the resulting disclosure of them in court, that most residents began to betray the culprits, and presently most believed that them should be rebuffed. Change of assessment came in the individual domain too, as Luis Ocampo's mom likewise considered up her child and recognized that she had been a visually impaired devotee for such a long time, and presently upheld his battle. Alongside the positive and exemplary circumstance of the matter, there was a space of central issue with respect to the public authority too. It had been a short time since Raúl Alfonsín had come to power, and like any remaining states, he likewise needed to stay in power to the extent that this would be possible. For this, they needed to ensure that they didn't totally lose support from specific strong areas of society and furthermore, in particular, guarantee that the court preliminaries didn't prompt one more military uprising in the country. For this, they believed Strassera should deal with the case with intense wariness, and it eventually straightforwardly affected the condemning too. However, Julio Strassera was not one to dial back, as he introduced his end contention on the 18th of September, 1985, in which he summarized the frightful circumstance in a sincere way in court and cunningly utilized the new government's well-known motto Nunca Más, or no more, to request the military leaders to be rebuffed. The seat of 6 appointed authorities at long last perused their sentences on the 9th of December, 1985, and it was a significantly positive choice, despite the fact that not a total accomplishment for Strasera and Ocampo. Of the 9 commandants, the 2 most infamous ones, Jorge Videla and Emilio Massera, were given a sentence of life detainment, and a third, Roberto Viola, was given 17 years, which really proposed till his passing since Viola was at that point matured at that point. Armando Lambruscini of the Naval Force and Orlando Agosti of the Flying Corps were condemned to jail for quite a long time and 4.5 years, individually. 4 others, Omar Grafigna, Leopoldo Gualtieri, Jorge Anaya, and Basilio Lamidozo, were absolved and seen as not at fault for the charges, unfortunately. This was likely because of the public authorities' strain to not rebuff every one of the 9 individuals, but rather Argentina, 1985 makes no notice of it. At last, prodded by the support of his young child and the commitment he had made to his companion Alberto Muchnik on his deathbed, Julio Strasera continued to attempt to look for equity. Argentina, 1985 attracts to a satisfying end as Julio Strasera is seen setting up an allure of the decision on exactly the same night that he gets insight about the adjudicator's choice. The film gives some more data regarding the matter, as the preliminary of the juntas turned into the primary occurrence in history that common equity had sentenced culprits for a tactical fascism. Albeit certain exemption regulations had been acquired after the preliminary, these regulations were lifted a few years after the fact too, and from that point forward, in excess of 1,000 different culprits have been sentenced for violations against mankind. As Argentina has figured out how to run as a vote-based system uninterruptedly beginning around 1983, more are being dealt with, and a cognizant exertion is being made to respect every one of whose lives were crushed by the traditional fundamentalist rulers during the messy conflict. Thank you for watching, hope you enjoyed the film. My major motivation is your support, so please don't forget to like the videos and subscribe to my channel for more videos and updates.